Hi, I'm Nancy McSherry Jensen. I'm the CEO of the Swing Shift. You're joining us for our weekly Hangout Habits. We're now recording these and we drop them weekly on 10 a.m. Pacific time on our Hangout Habits webpage. So we're here to help you get into the habit of your job search. Today, we've got Corrinne Olsen, who's engineering lead at Remitly, to talk with us about her career and how she's incorporated values into that. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Corrinne, and then she and I are going to talk. So Corrinne's career started in small town Montana, where she used her love of the outdoors and her brand new computer science degree from U of M, go Grizz, to move from a small town web service provider and support for the U.S. Forest Service. And then she moved to an engineering manager at a fast growing mission-based financial services startup, Remitly. So we're going to talk about the through line of her career choices and how she integrates her values into her work. Hey, Corrinne, how's it going?
It's going great. I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you. So you currently work as an engineering lead at Remitly. On the surface, it looks like you've had a pretty straightforward career, but the reality is that you've made a couple of twists and turns along the way. What's the most consistent thing that you've done as you've moved along?
Honestly, I think the most consistent pattern I have is never doing the same thing twice. Now, I don't necessarily mean in job area. I've been in engineering for quite a while now, but as far as domain that I've specialized in, call it luck, call it willingness to try something new. I've never stayed in the same domain during my career. As you mentioned, I worked for the Forest Service. I ended up working for a nonprofit in Montana called the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. And then from there, moved to Atlanta actually, and started working for a job company. Yeah. And started working for a job seeking company called careerbuilder.com, which some people may have used or may have heard of in the past. But really the similarities are web development and software as a service. That's about as similar as they've been. I've done tiny contract companies to large global employers. I've worked at nonprofits to unicorn startups. And I've helped solve problems for a lot of different kinds of companies. And I think it really gives me a unique perspective. I really enjoy learning new things, and I think it translates really well to my career. I can always learn a new area of expertise and bring my previous knowledge and previous vision to the new company. And this flexibility gives me really great perspective.
Right. Right. And I love the idea of always learning and not repeating yourself over and over again. I think it's good for everyone to keep their skills fresh. Well, let's talk a little bit about how you started. You worked at a web service provider in a town of less than 5,000 people. So was it intimidating to shift from this very small community to major urban centers? And what did you learn there that you still use today?
Yeah, Hamilton, Montana. I used to commute about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on the weather, from Missoula while I was going to school. 3 times a week, I think, is what I was doing at the time. And yeah, it was a small company called Copavi Systems Inc. They did a lot of contract work with a lot of different companies to do web services. And yeah, I grew up in a really small town as well. I grew up in southeastern Montana in a town of about 800 people. And I was actually very intimidated, very overwhelmed with the thought of moving to, even just moving to Missoula was a bit of a change for me. And living there, going to school, to be fair, I loved it. I was there for almost 10 years and never thought I was going to leave. But the idea of moving to Atlanta and like visiting Seattle when I was younger, looking around and seeing all these people you don't know, all these strangers, really stressed me out. Yeah. And I was like, how do people live in places like this? And I just could not comprehend. I remember in high school thinking that when we took a trip out here when I was in school, and just being, how do people live like this? And I remember being on the waterfront, and now I love to walk down the waterfront. It's an interesting shift. I was lucky when I moved to Atlanta. I moved with my partner, who I'm still with, actually. We've been together almost 10 years. And we lived in the burbs. We lived in the suburbs in Atlanta. Our job wasn't actually in metro downtown. And so it was a little bit of a easier transition for me than it might have been otherwise. And I absolutely fell in love with Atlanta. Once we started exploring and I got to know the people and the area and the culture, and oh my God, the food, I fell in love with it. And my favorite thing that I learned from living and working in small towns and growing up where I did is people more or less are the same everywhere. If you are respectful, if you're kind, if you're genuine, you're going to meet the coolest people from all walks of life, and just treat people like they're your neighbors in a small town. And yeah.
And I think that there's many people who are have considered or are considering geographic moves, and that kind of leads to our next question. You made that geographic move when you took the role with Career Builder. What were the pros and cons, and how did your values play into that decision making process?
Honestly, it was a bit of a leap of faith. Like I mentioned, I was perfectly content in Montana. I'd lived there
Right.
my entire life. I'm a sixth generation Montanan. My mom's family's lived there forever. And I was working at a nonprofit that I was passionate about. My parents had been members of it previously. My dad used to take us there when we were kids. So I
Mhm.
really thought I'd found my zen. And
Right.
when my partner told me he got a job in Atlanta, I confronted all of those things and what I'd previously believed my path in life was going to be, and kind of decided that I wanted to try something else. I wanted to live somewhere else. I wanted to experience more diversity in my life, like both people and thought. And I guess my thought was, if I hate it, I can always move back. um,
Yes.
and so I decided to just kind of weigh the pros and cons, as you mentioned. Like the cons, new relationship. We had only been together probably for a year and a half. And moving is really
Yeah.
stressful. It's hard on a new relationship. It was way out of my comfort zone. My previous experience with big cities I'd never lived in one before. And it was far away from my family. And I'm very close to my family. And ultimately, I decided the pros of trying something new, learning something new, and staying with my partner. And like I said, we're still together, so it worked out. Yeah, I realized I would not regret it. Ultimately, I realized I was going to regret it if I didn't try it, and I would always wonder what if, and
Yeah.
so I decided to just kind of go for it.
Well, and I think that most people, when they're taking a job, particularly at the stage that you're at in your career, you're not just thinking about yourself. You're thinking about these bigger issues about your partner, your family, what's important to you.
Yep.
So I think that that's a very logical and understandable decision making set, right? I want to ask you a little bit about interviews because you've had a very interesting career progression. How do you prepare for interviews? What's worked and maybe what hasn't worked as well? And what advice can you give on women that are moving through that process now?
Well, it depends a little bit on the role, but there's something I always do regardless, whether it's a technical role, whether it's a leadership role, no matter what, is try and think about who I am and what my brand is. How do I want to show up? What
Yep.
behavior would show the presence I'm intending to represent when I'm talking to these people that might decide whether or not to hire me? And I really try and be intentional in my communication about what's important to me in a role. Like, why am I interested? Why am I applying in the first place? Um, discuss how discuss what my expectations would be if I were to take the role. It's like, here's what I see this title as, here's where I think I can contribute. Does this align with your expectations? Especially if you're talking to the person that's probably going to be your future boss or future coworkers. And one of the other big ones is things to avoid. And this is something I've been working on. Something I've noticed is, despite being what I believe is a very competent engineering manager, I really enjoy my job. But part of that is owning failures. So if I have a team and my team fails, I'm going to own that failure. That's me. I failed. I've done something that did not allow the team to succeed. But when there's team success, my tendency is, hey, the team succeeded, the team is killing it, like they're doing exactly what they need to do, all the success, all the honors for them, because they're the ones at the end of the day that are accomplishing the goals. And the problem with this, and this I will say is particularly common with female candidates, is the tendency to say we did this, we accomplished this, we, the team, and not owning the successes that you were in fact responsible for. So making sure that you really, I literally wrote this down in all caps in a notebook during my last interview process, like, don't say we, say I, so that I could really own the triumphs and the things that I had pushed forward and accomplished. So I did this, I accomplished that, and own the successes, ladies, like not just the failures. Do not apologize. Thank interviewers for their patience if you make a mistake, or if you're late, or your dog starts barking, like thank them for understanding how challenging it is to work from home. But don't apologize. You have nothing to apologize for. And just remembering that you're bringing a wealth of knowledge and diversity of thought to any organization you join, and remind your potential employers of this and your potential coworkers of the diversity of thought that you're bringing. I think that's really
I think that is excellent guidance, because I do think that many women do that. And you're right, women in particular do that. One thing.
I have a question before you move forward. So Corrinne, you talked about you wrote that down in your notebook. I'd love to know what else is in that notebook that you have when you're going on an interview. What other things do you put pen to paper and prepare on? You mentioned that you think about your values. Is there like an exercise that you do? Do you do an outline of answers for certain questions? What are the actual, like, actions that you take?
So again, I would say, so in the past, when I've interviewed for technical roles, I've done practice. So if you're interviewing to be an individual contributor, like an engineer, go to HackerRank, go to Interview Cake, go to all these places where you can do practice coding exercises and just practice. Because if you do that more and more, if you get familiar with the kinds of questions you're going to be asked, you're like, oh, these are easy. Because the chances are when someone asks you in an interview process, if you've thought about those, if you've gone through the motions, it's going to be much less deer in the headlights, much less scary if you've been practicing those kinds of things. Now for management and leadership positions, I actually try and make sure I have a list of projects, because a lot of times what you're going to be asked is, tell me about something you were really passionate about. Now, this will probably even come up if you're just interviewing for an engineering role, especially if it's more senior, is tell me about a project you did that you're really passionate about, and why were you passionate about it? And so I will try and write down a few projects and some of the details and why I really was passionate about it and how it went. Because at the end of the day, the project that you enjoyed working on the most could have been a failure. But like, if you know why it was a failure and you're able to explain why it was still one of the favorite things you did, maybe it's because the company pivoted another direction and you managed to realize that sooner rather than later, save the company a bunch of money by changing directions, right? Having a list of things you want to talk about, I think, is really important. And you said what was in my notebook, and I actually have notes off screen to the left that I glance over. You might see me glancing over because I wrote notes too. It's the only way that I'm comfortable with these kinds of things. This kind of stuff used to make me very, very nervous, and I've had to kind of just get over it. And in practice makes perfect. I think the more you do Zoom calls, the more you do interviews, whether face-to-face or remote, the easier that stuff becomes. Don't be afraid to interview for a position just because you think you might not get it, because the interview itself is going to be so valuable for preparing you for future ones. Take the ones that aren't as interesting. One, they might end up being super interesting. I've had that happen before. It's like, oh, this doesn't really sound like a role I would be into, but I'm going to take the interview because it's good practice and I'm curious to see what they have to say. And yeah, just
and I think sometimes, I know that sometimes hiring managers, if they like a candidate, they'll recast the role to fit their skills and abilities.
That happened to me actually when I got hired at the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. they were looking for someone more junior than I was at the time. They weren't looking for someone with a graduate degree. And they didn't think they could pay me enough, which is funny because it's Missoula, Montana, and a nonprofit. And I was like, I don't really care. And so they shuffled the role around a little bit to kind of fit my experience, and decided that they really wanted someone with a little bit more, and brought me in anyway. So absolutely, I've definitely seen that happen. I've been at organizations where I've reframed roles for people. So it's like, we wanted this, but honestly, this person's a rock star and I really want him on the team. So
I think it bears worth repeating what you had said about also think about your failures, because many times those are way more of a it shows the type of person you are and how you work through things, and way more compelling to hear about sometimes than the good things that you're doing. So prepare for both. I think a lot of people, it's kind of an old school way of thinking, like, I don't want to show my cards or anything that I failed at, or no weaknesses, and that's just not the case anymore. Because really what they're looking for, everyone fails in a job, everyone. But how do you manage that, and how do you work through it, and how do you do it different next time? And that thought process is really important in the modern interview in this day and age.
Right. I'll be honest, the first time I ever was a manager at Career Builder, I did not know what I was getting into, and I did not do a good job. And I am very much aware of that fact. And if any of my old team sees this, thank you for putting up with me. We did anonymous feedback about 6 months in, after I'd taken over a group of engineers that previously had been peers. And I wasn't prepared for the role, didn't know what I was doing. And the anonymous feedback was so bad that I cried. It was mortifying, but I didn't stop. I didn't give up. I learned from it. I said, okay, what do I do about this? And I met with everyone. I said, hey, I need your help. It's like, I didn't get any of this feedback directly. What can I do to make you feel like you can give me this feedback? Because I have to know in the moment, or I don't know how to fix it. And 6 months later, the same feedback survey was really good. So talk about those kinds of things, because failure is where you learn the most. It's more painful. That kind of growth is way more painful, but I think you just grow so much more quickly through your failures. And
that story itself, if I was a hiring manager, I'd way rather hear about that than something that you did well 10 years ago or 8 years ago, right? So I think that's just a really important point to remember.
And the insight, and then, I'll jump in and then let's move on. That I think the insight here is that you were insightful enough to take the feedback in the spirit it was meant, which is, let's make this better and let's work together to make sure that you're getting what you need and that I grow. So, that's like the perfect case scenario. Yeah, but I think we've all had that kind of feedback. I will say I've spent more than one review feedback meeting in tears going, oh, I thought I was a great manager. One thing that's consistent with almost all of your roles is the mission-based element. Can you talk more about its importance to you as you move into mid-career roles?
Yeah, absolutely. I really love having a mission. I like being passionate about what I do. I like being excited about what my company does and contributing to a mission I really believe in. And even in the less mission-oriented roles, I've really truly believed in the vision, whether it was because of a strong leadership. Like my last CEO was the one who convinced me to take the job. And he came in and he just did such a good job of selling me on the company. And I was there for more than 3 years. Or, personal experience with the company. Career Builder was one of those. They helped me find a job, and they helped my boyfriend find a job. And we were like, hey, let's go work for them. Why not? Why look for a job through them? Let's just work for them. And it worked out really well for us both. But I think it becomes more important as you begin to gain some impact on the achievement of the mission. Once you become a senior level engineer, individual contributor, or a team lead, or an engineering manager, or whatever, you begin to become more responsible, not just for the delivery, but the approach, shaping the approach and making the decisions that help the mission become a reality. I find this both terrifying and really exhilarating, fulfilling. Terrifying in that I am constantly striving to make the best decisions I can with the information I have, and I don't always have all the information. And exhilarating in that I'm empowered and trusted to contribute my best work towards my company's goals. Yeah.
Well, and that I think many people, especially right now, are reevaluating where they are putting their time and energy and skills and effort. And mission is an incredibly important part of that, because if it's going to take you away from other things that are demanding your attention, it's got to be worth the time and effort. So I have one final question. So for women who are considering making similar moves, right, whether they're either leveraging their skills into businesses that match their values, or maybe making a geographic shift, what's your best piece of guidance for them?
Confidence. Have confidence in yourself, ladies. If you decide to make a change, like, believe in that change. Believe in yourself and your ability to confront any challenge that arrives from your shift in direction. Don't look back. Don't play what if. Move forward and invest yourself completely in the path you choose. Without giving a new experience your best, you're always going to wonder if you could have done better. And stretching to meet new challenges is how you grow. And just give it your all.
Sage advice. Corrinne Olsen from Remitly, thank you so much for your time and energy and effort. We're so excited to have you here on Hangout Habits. Please join us weekly. We'll have new videos every week. You can join our community page, go to Facebook and join the Swing Shift community.
And Nancy, actually, before we go, I have one question.
Here we go.
Obviously, everyone talks about networking, and how you have to leverage your network. Did you tell us how you leveraged your network when you made your career transitions? Was that helpful? Did you make a pointed effort to do that? Was it just an organic thing that happened? Did you use your network when you made your career transitions?
So it was hard to use it for Career Builder because I was moving cross country and I didn't have a network in Atlanta. When I moved to Seattle, I started building a network. So my network here is, 5 years, I guess, now that I've lived in the Seattle area. And I definitely leveraged it when I was looking at Remitly, because I wasn't actively looking at the time. And they came to me and asked if I'd be willing to look at this role. And